Hey guys, this is a review of lecture 40 and 41, the cochlear tract and then the vestibular tract. Both we know are associated with cranial nerve 8, the vestibular cochlear nerve. So we'll start with lecture 40, the cochlear tract, and then we'll take a quick break and do lecture 41. All right, so just a reminder, again, starting with our cross-section of the brain, brainstem, medulla, pons, and midbrain. And then we're going to be dealing with a portion we can't see super well here, but part of the temporal lobe. So again, we like to think that rostral is to nostril and caudal is to claudal, aka your feet. So we'll be looking at rostral, medulla, middle, caudal pons, middle pons, all the way up to the thalamus region with the medial geniculate nucleus, which is adjacent to the thalamus. All right, so this is just a quick overview of what we're looking at for the first one, the cochlear pathway, where, remember that the ear is made up of outer, middle, and inner ear, and the inner ear has the cochlea and the vestibular system, and so the cochlea has to do with sound itself. So we are first going to have, our first neurons are located in their ganglia, or the spiral ganglia located in the malleolus bone of the cochlea. They're going to send their axons to part of the rostral medulla at the cochlear nucleus, which we see here. And then, so spiral ganglion, synapses of the cochlear nucleus. There are three different parts of that, and the dorsal cochlear nucleus is going to send up an axon, as we'll call it the dorsal acoustic striae, send it up to the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus, or it will end up at the inferior caniculi. Overall, it's going to end up at the inferior caniculi, and then it will, after that, go to the medial geniculate nucleus, which here's the thalamus. It's adjacent to the thalamus. It's part of the diencephalon. And then the medial geniculate nucleus is going to send out fibers to this region right here, which is the temporal gyrus of the temporal lobe, and then the superior temporal gyrus, and we'll have the anterior and posterior temporal gyrus. They will be connected to Wernicke's area for comprehension of speech, and then Broca's area via the articulate fasciculus, and Broca's, like boca, mouth in Spanish, is for the muscles of speech. All right, so it's not too bad. We do have a little funky stuff going on with this cochlear nuclei. We said we had the dorsal part right here, and then we also have this ventral part. But overall, we're going from cochlea to temporal lobe for understanding of speech, and then we'll look at the cross sections overall. One in the medulla, and then pons, midbrain, and we'll look at rostral midbrain, where we'll be able to see part of the thalamus and the medial geniculate nucleus. All right, so it's not too bad. We'll just get to it. All right, so here we have this very large page. First off, as we said, our first neuron is in the spiral ganglion of the cochlea itself, part of the inner ear, and it's going to send its axons down and through the hole in the skull that we call the internal acoustic meatus. Okay, so its axons are going to go through the internal acoustic meatus to get to our second neurons, and our second neurons are in either the dorsal cochlear nucleus or the ventral cochlear nucleus, but they're in the cochlear nuclear complex of the rostral medulla. Okay, and so that would be here if we trace it along. First neuron coming in, and then it's going to synapse in either the ventral cochlear nucleus or the dorsal cochlear nucleus. All right, and so that brings us to our first split. If you are in the dorsal cochlear nucleus, you're going to send out your axons, which we'll call dorsal acoustic striae, and it's going to cross the midline, so it's going to contralateral, and then it's going to join the ascending auditory pathways, which we'll call the lateral lemniscus. Okay, and so this is going to synapse at the lateral lemniscus nuclei or at the inferior colliculus, which you may remember from our cross-section of the caudal midbrain, the frog. So let's take a look at that. So we've come in, we have our first axon, our axon of our spiral ganglion comes in, it synapses at the ventral cochlea or the dorsal cochlear nucleus, and this whole region right here is the cochlear nucleus complex on the rostral medulla. And then you get your second axon, or second nucleus, which is bodies in the dorsal cochlear nucleus. We go across as the dorsal acoustic striae. We come up, and as we come up, we are now part of the lateral lemniscus. And we're going to go ahead and synapse at either the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus, in which case we'll send another axon to the inferior colliculus, which are like the eyes on the frog for the caudal midbrain. All right, so this is caudal midbrain right here, and we have made it to the inferior colliculus right here. Okay, inferior colliculi can talk to each other via the commissure of the inferior colliculi, and then before we move on, let's take a look at the ventral cochlear nucleus. So that would be this section right here. So we have the ventral cochlear nucleus. It's going to send out both intermediate acoustic striae and ventral acoustic striae. The intermediate acoustic striae are going to cross the midline and join the ascending auditory pathway, the lateral lemniscus. And then it's going to do the exact same thing that the striae from the dorsal cochlear nucleus is, synapse at the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus or at the inferior colliculus directly. Okay, the ventral acoustic striae is a little bit different because it is going to go to either the olivary complex or the nuclei of the trapezoidal body, and we'll see that here. So we have the first part of the ventral cochlea is going to send out an intermediate acoustic striae that's going to go and join the lateral lemniscus, which we see here. And now that it's part of the lateral lemniscus, it is going to synapse at either this guy right here, which is the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus, or synapse directly at the inferior colliculus. Okay, for the ventral cochlear nucleus part that's sending out the ventral acoustic striae, so the third potential pathway, the ventral acoustic striae, that's going to come and synapse at either these trapezoidal bodies, which we see here, or we'll go to the superior olivary complex. All right, and this diagram's a little bit confusing. It was given to us in lecture. Right here, we see where the dorsal, the cochlear nuclei are part of the rostral medulla. Then the superior olivary complex is part of the caudal pons, right? So I don't know why exactly that. Perhaps it's easier to show it this way. It is a little bit of a challenge to visualize this, though. All right, so now that we are in we'll continue with the trapezoidal bodies. So it's innervating the trapezoidal bodies. We weren't told any more about it than that as a potential target, so I doubt we'll have a test question. But you'll continue as the ventral acoustic striae from the trapezoidal body into the lateral lemniscus, going up, and then now you're part of it. So you join this guy right here, nucleus of the lateral lemniscus, synapse there, and then ultimately synapse at the inferior colliculus. But we call this the ascending acoustic pathway, lateral lemniscus. Okay, then we have, what about this section that ended at this ventral cochlear nucleus, sent out a ventral striae that also ended at the superior olivary complex? Well, the superior olivary complex, so we're dealing with right here. I haven't quite gotten to this part yet, but the superior olivary complex is going to do two things. One, it's going to receive sound intensity signals and timing signals from the cochlea itself. And so we can actually see that here. This is the superior olivary complex. You see that it's synapsing with this ventral acoustic striae, but it's also going to go ahead and send out a nice little dendrite to the cochlea, and it wants to find out relative intensity of the sound left and right, and then relative timing of the sound left and right. Okay, so once you've gotten so either that information or the synapse, the superior olivary complex is going to go ahead and send up a axon ipsilaterally, and it will join the ascending pathway ipsilaterally. Or what it will also do is send a axon contralaterally, and it will join the lateral lemniscus. All right, so just to summarize, first order axon comes in, synapses at the cochlear nuclear complex in the rostral medulla. Then you get a couple of pathways. One is the dorsal striae, and it's relatively unexciting. It just goes and joins the ascending pathway, it goes up. Then you also have the ventral cochlear nucleus, which sends off an intermediate acoustic striae, which again just goes straight up, not super exciting. But the really interesting one is the one from the ventral cochlear nucleus that sends to the olivary nucleus, which takes input data directly from, which will take data directly from the cochlea. And then we also have paths to these trapezoidal bodies, and then that will continue along as the lateral lemniscus. Okay. So now we're in the lateral lemniscus. We've ascended, as we said, the lateral lemniscus is going to synapse at the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus, or it'll go directly to the inferior colliculus right there. Okay, and so then you go from the inferior colliculus, you're going to send an axon from the neuron body in the inferior colliculus. You're going to go up to the medial geniculate nucleus of the rostral midbrain, and this is part of the diencephalon, the thalamus, hypothalamus, diencephalon. So diencephalon, thalamus, this is going to be medial geniculate nucleus is adjacent to the thalamus. And then the final leg of this journey is from the medial geniculate nucleus up to the transverse temporal gyre of the temporal lobe. Okay, and then we know that that is connected to Wernicke's area and then Broca's area overall. All right, so that's what we had. This is just saying what happens to the ascending pathway. Body in the inferior colliculus is going to send up axons, and we call that axon the brachium of the inferior colliculus, to the part that's adjacent to the thalamus, the medial geniculate nucleus. And then the medial geniculate nucleus is going to send auditory radiations, its axons, to the transverse temporal gyre of Heschel in the temporal cortex. And then the transverse temporal gyre will include the anterior gyrus, the primary auditory area, aka Brodmann's area, and then the posterior gyrus, which is auditory association area. Okay, so then what does this look like in cross sections? These are the cross sections given to us in lab. So here we have the rostral medulla, and you may remember that I said the rostral medulla is where you have this guy right here. All right, it's not in the caudal pons. It's rostral medulla, which is a little bit irritating based on how the slides are oriented. So right here, you have the nerve fibers of the cochlear nerve, and then you have, or the ganglion fibers, and then you have the cochlear nerve cells right here. All right, so ganglion, and then this is going to go and continue up here. So this is the cochlear nerve, and that's going to synapse in this region right here, which is basically I tried to represent this diagram right here, but this part is really like this part right here. So it's kind of hard to show, but basically we have cochlear nerve right here, and then it's really synapsing and sending from the cochlear nerve complex, it's sending branches. We have the dorsal striae, and then this is lateral lemniscus, and then you see we have the ventral striae here, and that's going to this region right here, and this region is the superior olivary complex, right? It's right here on that side. And then here you have trapezoidal bodies. So once you have gotten there, so for the superior, the superior olivary complex right here, you'll send out an axon through the ipsilateral lateral lemniscus, and then here's the contralateral lateral lemniscus. All right, so then you'll go from caudal pons up to rostral pons. Here's the lateral lemniscus, so this is just tracing the pathway. All right, and this red one is from the olivary complex, but there would theoretically be, more of the fibers, the striae, from the dorsal acoustic striae, intermediate acoustal striae on both sides. So from the this red nerve by itself, but that is in fact the offshoot of the superior ovulary nuclear complex. Okay, so here we go through rostral medulla in this region. This is lateral lemniscus. Then we get to the caudal midbrain, and caudal midbrain, we said you're going to go ahead and synapse here and here. And so this is the inferior caniculus, the eyeball of our frog shape, and then here is the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus. And then once we've synapsed here, then in the inferior caniculus, we're going to send off an axon, which we call the brachium of the inferior caniculus. That will get to the rostral midbrain, which we will see our first sign of the thalamus, and adjacent to the thalamus is our median geniculate nucleus. So now that we synapse in the median geniculate nucleus, we can go ahead and send an axon to the transverse temporal gyrus so that our auditory signal can be translated. Okay, and then so this is, we already looked at this. Here's just cross, like a ripped out section. This whole region right here is, the target part of the transverse lobe of the brain. And you have anterior transverse gyrus, posterior transverse gyrus, and then 6 is superior transverse temporal gyrus, superior temporal gyrus. Okay. All right, so then this is just another view of the same thing. I encourage you to look at this if you want. But this is the diagram that was given to us in lab. And then here we have a couple more things labeled. So this is just another sort of an outside view of the brainstem. So this is the inferior colliculus. Then we have, then we have here the median geniculate nucleus, and then we know that will send up its axon via auditory radiations to the temporal gyrus of the temporal lobe. All right, so then clinical correlations, relatively straightforward. So conductive deafness is when you have impairment of the passage of sound waves. Generally in kids, this is from otis media, so inflammation of the middle ear. Deafness itself, if you have ipsilateral, so deafness on one side, this is when there's conduction deafness, so destruction of a structure inside of the ear itself. And then lateral lemniscus lesion, so here we have our sending pathway, the lemniscus. If you have something go wrong, then it's going to cause the other side to be predominantly deaf. And so the contralateral side will be the primary deafness side, but you'll also lose some on the ipsilateral side. Why is that the case? Well, so if you have unilateral lesion of the auditory pathways beyond the cochlear nuclei results in bilateral hearing loss and the predominant loss of the contralateral side. And so you think, well, remember the nuclei send out the dorsal striae, then it sent out the intermediate striae, but then you also had the ventral striae, and the ventral striae actually sent a pathway up ipsilaterally, and then it sent a pathway contralaterally with these guys. So from, say, the left ear, you have one pathway ipsilaterally from the ventral striae, and then all of the other pathways are contralateral. So if you have an issue that is past the cochlear nuclei, it's going to be bilateral, but it's mostly going to be on the contralateral side. Okay, then we had René's test and Weber's test. René's test we did in clinical skills, but the basic idea is that you have conduction through air and bone that's slightly different. And so if you can hear, so you tap it like this until, or you start here, they won't hear it any longer, and then you move it to their ear, in front of their ear, and they should still be able to hear it, right? So it's transmitting through bone here, and then it's transmitting through sound, and so they should be able to hear it longer after you've put it in front of their ear in the air, and if they can't, then there's something wrong with the conduction of sound on this side. All right, Weber's test is a bilateral test. Basically, you want to localize a hearing lesion, so the ear that sounds good is good, and the ear that sounds bad is bad. So the sensor neural lesion will localize to the unaffected ear. You'll hear in the unaffected ear, and conductive deficit will localize to the affected ear. All right, presbycusis is gradual hearing loss with age, and then the higher tones are lost earliest. Other clinical correlations, we were told about auditory evoked potentials, AEPs, as an electrophysiological tool which can establish evidence of normality. Basically, you get this nice little graph, and you play, a nice little sound, and then you can measure the essentially the voltage difference between these 2 points, and you can get this nice little graph. And so the idea is that based on the pathway of sounds, And we know that we start right at the nerve itself, then we get to the cochlear nucleus. So nerve, cochlear nucleus, then we're in rostral medulla, caudal pons, and so the traveling through the superior olive and trapezoidal body, and then here you're going to be in upper pons, lower midbrain. So the idea is that you could have somebody do this test and compare it before and after an operation or during an operation and see if you've caused any issues or changes. It's a good sense of like where the abnormality might be. All right, but basically you follow the pathway of how would the nerve signal travel. So one is CN8, 2 is cochlear nucleus, 3 is lower pons, and then 4 and 5 is midbrain, upper pons. Okay, so not too bad. We'll take a quick break and then we'll do lecture 41. All right, here's part 2, guys. This is the vestibular system. So we know that this is part of the vestibular cochlear nerve, cranial nerve 8, but specifically the vestibular system has to do with this part of the inner ear with our 3 semicircular tubercles, and then we have the utricle and the saccule. This is obviously a cartoon, so not an accurate drawing from an anatomy point of view, but what we're focused on is the vestibular system as part of the somatosensory system, which deals with unconscious proprioception, right? So this is key. The vestibular system is keeping you upright by, allowing extension of your muscles. It has its own set of receptors, the vestibular apparatus right here, part of the inner ear. Nice, we know all this, and it has its own motor system that acts at the spinal cord and brainstem levels, which we'll see it's not too bad. Vestibular system acts as its own reflex system, and it's converting our sensory information directly into motor activities, such that you can do this unconscious proprioception and turn that unconscious proprioception into, keeping you upright. All right, so know where you are in 3D space and integrate that. So its major function is integration with other systems, vision, and continuous proprioception, and then orient yourself as a result. It has 3 major functions. So maintain muscle tone in the extensors via descending motor tracts, maintain equilibrium, right? You don't want to contract one leg more than the other and fall over, and then also produce compensatory eye movements in response to head movements via ascending motor tracts. So none of these are too bad. We'll find out that it's relatively straightforward, but basically we have from our friends the cochlea, we have our nerve coming in, and it is part of the overall vestibular cochlear nerve, cranial nerve 8, but we see that it comes in and goes through the internal meatus, right, that hole in your skull, and then it will go to the vestibular nuclei. All right, and we remember that the cochlear one went to the cochlear nuclei, so vestibular nuclei, oh, it's not too bad, right? We can do this. Okay, so we're coming in to the vestibular nuclei complex, and it turns out there's actually 4 different parts of it. We're concerned with the lateral portion, the superior portion, and then the medial portion, the semicircular ducts, which you may remember has to do with nodding your head up and down, angular acceleration, shaking your head no, and then sort of cracking your neck. That's the semicircular ducts, right? Twisting your neck like an owl would be cracking your neck. This is all angular acceleration. And then our utricle and saccule are about moving your head up and down, and then like in and out, right? If you were to push your neck forward overall. All right, and so that's going to go to the lateral part of the vestibular nuclear complex, and then the semicircular is going to the superior, and then the medial as well. All right, but overall it's composed of 4 different components: the superior, lateral, medial, and inferior vestibular nuclei. And the idea is that the information is coming into the medulla. This is located in the medulla. And then from there, we're going to go to 4 different potential destinations. Descend to the limbs of the neck, right? That's the motor part of this to make sure that we're not falling over. Go to the cerebellum. The cerebellum is going to give us some inhibitory or stimulatory signals saying, hey, you should contract harder. No, you shouldn't contract as much. To the pons/eyes, we want to get to cranial nerve 3 to control eye movement, cranial nerve 4, and cranial nerve 6, right? These guys are all associated with the muscles around the eye. Okay, and then the final place is to go to the thalamus, and then the reticular formation, and ultimately to the somatosensory cortex. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. This fourth one is really just, we were given one sentence in lecture, so it's not super important. All right, well, it is very important, but for getting tested on it, I think we're going to be focused on the eye movements and then limb movements. All right, so as we said, we have our vestibular nerve coming in. It goes to this vestibular nuclei right here, and then you have 4 different pathways. The first one is coming down like this, and we have 2 different ones there actually. And then that's going to go to the muscles and contract them. We have the extensor muscles and the flexor muscles and keep us nice and balanced. And then that's the first pathway. The second pathway is to go to the cerebellum. And you may remember that the cerebellum helps with things like, motor function. So this guy's going to send back some signals, and he's going to be like, no, or you should not contract as much. You should contract more. And then it's going to send back those signals, which will synapse here, and then maybe it goes down our first pathway to the muscles of the limbs or the head and neck. Okay, so those are the first 2 pathways. The next one is the one that we will probably get a test question on, which is going contralaterally to the abducens nerve. And then from the abducens nerve, you go back contralaterally again to the original side, and then you're going to go to up to the lateral rectus muscle on the eye. And the lateral rectus is the ones that's controlling the outside muscle of the eye, right? So there are 2 eyeballs. These are lateral rectus. And then the other part of this pathway is to go to cranial nerve 4, the trochlear nerve, and this is going to control the superior oblique muscle. And so, pull our eyes upwards and obliquely. We'll see a diagram of that. And then the final place it's going to go is to the ocular motor nerve. And we love the ocular motor nerve because it does the medial rectus, and so that's going to pull our eyes inwards overall. So we'll see that the lateral rectus and medial rectus are going to be very important for the reflex pathways that we're talking about. All right, so that's the third pathway. And then the very final one that we said we're probably not going to get tested on is the one that just goes straight up to the thalamus. And then from the thalamus, it's going to go to our guy, the somatosensory cortex, with our friend the homunculus, which is saying, hey, you got some stuff going on here, etc. in these different parts of the body. All right, so first tract is the descending tract, right? This guy right here. Let's get to it. So basically, we have actually 2 different tracts that are descending. Once we have our innervation come into the vestibular nucleus, it's going to, again, from the vestibular system, it's going to send down a tract to the spinal cord. And so you're going to have a lateral vestibulospinal tract, LVST, and then you're going to have a medial vestibular spinal tract. The lateral one is going to control the limb and trunk movements, and then the medial one is going to control the head and neck movements. All right. And so as it comes down, it's going to go in this, you may remember, this is the portion right here is the anterior funiculus, and that is going to be actually adjacent to our ALS pathway, which is about right here. Okay, so we're descending though, and once we get to any individual spinal cord level, we'll synapse at the, if this is the dorsal root, this is the anterior root, so we'll synapse at the anterior horn, and so this is dorsal horn, this is anterior horn, synapse at the dorsal horn, and then we'll send out innervation to muscles, tell them to keep us balanced. All right, so it's providing proper tone to extensor muscles, head and neck muscles with response to linear or rotational acceleration. Okay, so as we said, the lateral one's going to the trunk and the limb, and then the medial part is going to the head and the neck. All right, so that's the basics, sort of like 100-foot view. Let's get slightly more detailed from our information from our lecture. So as we said, there's 2 descending tracts from the vestibular vestibular nuclear complex, which maintains body muscle in equilibrium. We have our lateral tract, lateral vestibulospinal tract, LVST, which is going to descend and terminate on each of the spinal levels ipsilaterally on the same side, and it's going to innervate, again, trunk and limb. So extensors via these alpha motor neurons, and then extensor muscle tone via gamma motor neurons. And so acts primarily on the motor neurons in the medial part of the ventral region. All right, and so we'll see that. And then we have the medial vestibulospinal, MVST, which descends through the medial fasciculus, which we'll see also ascending upwards when we talk not about this part, but about the other pathways in the medulla bilaterally and in the spinal cord ipsilaterally. Okay, and then again, medial is for head and neck movement. All right, so let's just take a look at that. This is the diagram from our lab. We have our vestibular ganglion. Its cell axon is coming in, and then it gets to the vestibular nuclear complex, vestibular nuclear complex, which is right here. And then we said we're dealing with our descending pathways. So this one right here is our medial descending pathway, and you can see that it's gone bilaterally, and it's going to descend bilaterally inside of the medial longitudinal fasciculus. All right, MLF. Okay, then we have the lateral vestibular tract, which is coming down laterally, and it is the lateral vestibulospinal tract. And what does that actually look like? So quite literally, that is called lateral vestibulospinal tract, and it's located in the anterior fasciculus. So it's literally just going down, and then it's going to send at each level, send an axon to synapse in this anterior horn. All right, and then from this anterior horn, we're going to send out a new axon from a different neuron located here to the muscle. All right, and so the medial part is coming down via MLF, but it's coming down bilaterally, so it leaves the vestibular nuclear complex. It's going to go down via one MLF and then the ipsilateral MLF. All right, so let's just take a look at that, starting with, why don't we do the one we just talked about? So this is the medial vestibular vestibulospinal tract. All right, so here we have our vestibulo nuclear complex, and then we have our neurons coming to the medial longitudinal funiculi right here, and it's going bilaterally, and then it's going to go ahead and descend. All right, so it's going to descend. I'm just going to draw it in, so descend, here's where it is in the caudal medulla, and it's going bilaterally, and then it's going to descend to each of the spinal levels, and it will synapse at each of the spinal levels in this anterior horn, and then those will go to muscle. All right, so not too bad. That's the medial vestibulospinal tract, goes bilaterally. And then we have the lateral vestibulospinal tract. So here we have our vestibulonuclear complex. It sends out its innervation via LVST. And you can see that here. And at each level, it synapses in the anterior horn. All right, but it's ipsilaterally only. So here we have our nice cross sections. Here we have caudal pons. How do we know? Because it's our friend Darth Vader. And so here we have our vestibular complex. You can see that we have our two different tracts. Here's our lateral tract coming down. And so here again, this is our vestibular nuclear complex. And we're sending down our LVST. So LVST, and you can just see that right here. And when you get to the spinal cord, it's a little bit easier to tell, and because it's located in the anterior horn. And then up here we have we descend at MLF. So this is MLF right here. So we're going bilaterally, and then we descend downwards. So we get to MLF, which is located here. We descend downwards. MLF is located here. We descend downwards until we get to here, and then we synapse also at the dorsal or the anterior horn, and then our muscle fibers come out. All right, so that's how our vestibular system sends its innervation to the trunk and limb and then head and neck. So not too bad, but what about getting some, integrating with the rest of the system? So what if we want some, feedback from the cerebellum? So this is where you have, the vestibular system. You get sensation from the inner ear. You're like, whoa, we were accelerating. My head just started to move, or, we came to a sudden stop or something like that, or turning around the corner of the car. So it's going to go ahead and send that information, one, down to the spinal cord to innervate the body, but, also send it to the cerebellum so we can modulate these movements, okay? So we have our innervation coming in from the internal acoustic meatus. This is, the vestibulocochlear nerve coming into the vestibular nucleus and the medulla. And now that we're here, we can go ahead and send fibers out to the cerebellum, and it's going to do that via the juxta-restiform body of the inferior cerebellar peduncle. All right, and we'll see that in just a little bit, but on the cerebellum, there's 3 different places it goes, and we group 2 of them together, and the third is by itself. So one of them is, the first place we go is grouped together. This is the flocculonodular lobe, also called the vestibulocerebellum. So that's one place we go. The other place is the fastigial nucleus, and the fastigial nucleus is going to send positive feedback back. So the fastigial nucleus is like, hey, contract harder. The floccular nodal lobe will send back negative feedback and be like, no, you shouldn't contract harder. Take it easy. Okay, so more detail on that from our lecture. Outgoing from the vestibular cochlear nucleus, the vestibular nuclear complex, you have your efferent fibers going to the vestibulocerebellum. That's our first target, and that includes the flocculus and nodulus, as well as the uvula. And then the second target is the fastigial nucleus ipsilaterally. Okay, so let's just take a look at that. Here we have our vestibular nuclear complex, right? So we have our vestibular nerve coming in, synapse is there, then it can go to 2 different targets overall, all right? One of them is right here. We'd call this the vestibulocerebellum. So this is the vestibulocerebellum, which includes the uvula and then the flocculus and nodulus. Okay, so from here to there, or directly from the vestibular nerve to this region, the uvula and the flocculus nodalis. And then the other one is, as we can see here, so it's going to that same region right here, uvula, flocculus, and nodalis of the cerebellum. It's also going to our third place, which is the fastical nucleus. All right, why do we bother specifying where it goes? Well, they have different functions, because you can send, so your outgoing data, now you get incoming data from the cerebellum. And so the flocculus and nodalis lobe and the uvula are going to send fibers to the vestibular nuclear complex, as well as to the fastical nucleus. But as we said, this guy is going to send, so this region can send innervation out to the fastical part, but then also back to the vestibular nuclear complex, and it's going to send inhibitory signals and be like, don't contract as hard, okay? Then we have the fastical nucleus is going to send excitatory signals to the VNC, vestibular nuclear complex. So this would be the vestibular nuclear complex, and so the fastical region will send a positive signal, say, hey, you should contract harder for this particular input. All right, and then this is just all of those put together. Vestibular nuclear complex, here we have our vestibular ganglion, so our nerve is coming in, synapses in the complex, then you send out via the juxta-restiform body of that makes up the inferior cerebellar peduncle, send out an axon to the vestibular cerebellum, which again includes the uvula and then the flocculus nodulus. All right, so those are located here. And then also send signal to the fastical nuclei. And then in response, fastical nuclei will send a positive signal back. And then this vestibular cerebellum will send negative signals back, inhibitory signals. All right, so what does it actually look like on our slides? So here we have the caudal pons, our friend Darth Vader. I'm sure he would appreciate us saying that. So we have here, this is our vestibular nuclear complex, VCN, and you're going to send innervation out via the inferior cerebellar peduncle, which we would also call the, inside of that we have the juxtarestiform body. All right, so that's here, and then we go to the fasticle and the uvula, as well as the flocculus and nodulus. All right, so this is all the cerebellum. All right, we're getting there. So next we have our friends. So we did caudal pons. Now we're in rostral medulla. So we just gone. We've gone a little bit caudally from caudal pons to rostral medulla, and so here we see vestibulocochlear nucleus, and we send innervation up to fastical nucleus, and then this is a weird cross section. To be honest, I don't entirely see how this. Yeah, it's a little weird, but here is the flocculus down here. All right, so this is flocculus. Here's fastical nucleus. Okay, and then here we have a weird cross-section of rostral medulla plus the cerebellum. So here we have our vestibular nuclear complex. We send innervation out to, and this is really weird because the nodulus and the flocculus should be near each other, and they send out a, that axon via the inferior cerebral peduncle. So here is part of the inferior cerebral peduncle, which has the juxtarestiform body in it. So you're sending innervation to the flocculus that way, but it must be a weird cross-section because we're sending innervation to nodulus here, and then this is the fastical nucleus. All right, and so again, this is what it should look like up here: fastical nucleus, nodulus, which should be adjacent to the flocculus. So this is a weird cross-section of some sort. All right, so not too bad. Cerebellum again is to modulate our vestibulospinal movements. Okay, then we have the pons region, and so this is all about the eye reflexes. So we actually like this part. It's not too bad once we dive into it. So as we explained from our huge overview, we have our vestibular nucleus, right? So we have our vestibular nerve coming in through the internal meatus right there, and then it comes and synapses on the vestibular nucleus, and the third pathway that we have is to go up to the eyes. And so first thing we do is we leave this region right here. We go contralaterally to the abducens nerve, cranial nerve 6. The abducens nerve is already ready to go and innervate the lateral rectus, so it's going to send up its innervation up to the lateral rectus. But when it do that, it's also going to send out branches to the trochlear nerve, and so the trochlear nerve is then going to innervate the superior oblique, and then it's also going to, this abducens nerve is also going to send innervation to the medial rectus, which is going to innervate, or to the ocular motor nerve, which is going to innervate the medial rectus. Okay, so basically the idea is that the medial vestibular nucleus, this guy right here, crosses over to the contralateral abducens nucleus. So it's sending right here, contralateral to the abducens nucleus, which then crosses over again and gives stimulation to trochlear and ocular motor on its way to lateral rectus. Okay, so the idea is that we have horizontal movements, right, like this, is controlled by ocular motor and abducens, and this is what we'd be tested on, presumably, because we're going to deal with the reflex question, which we'll get to. And then vertical movements are from ocular motor and trochlear with the superior oblique. All right, so ocular motor is going to do medial rectus. All right, so here we have lateral rectus, and here's medial rectus. So think about it like this, two eyeballs that we're looking at. Medial rectus is on the inside, lateral rectus on the outside, okay? And then superior oblique comes in like this, and yeah, so ocular motor, medial rectus, trochlear, superior oblique, abducens, lateral rectus. Okay, and so how do we actually get to this connection? We are back to our friends, the medial longitudinal fasciculus, MLF. Okay, and the purpose is to control movement. We would call this the vestibulo-ocular reflex, and the idea is that if your head moves this way, then your eye should move this way to allow for tracking. All right, and that's what this is saying. Okay, So let's get into a tiny bit more detail with what's actually going on. So here we have the material from lecture. We're saying here we have the vestibular nuclear complex. We have our neuron from the vestibular ganglion coming from our inner ear, comes up, synapses on this complex. Then it's going to send a neuron up, an axon up to the abducens nerve, and then the abducens nerve's like, I got it. I'm going to go to the trochlear nerve, and I'm going to go to the ocular motor nerve, and then I'm also going to go out to the eye itself and do the lateral rectus muscle. Okay, and so that's quite literally it, but let's see that in text. So the idea is that we take in innervation from the vestibular system. It's like, hey, we've moved our head, right? We have some angular acceleration, or head's moved up and down, or left and right, whatever it is, we would like you to move your eye to compensate for that. All right, so it's going to produce compensatory eye movements through the vestibular ocular reflex in response to head movements through the ascending MLF, medial longitude fasciculus. All right, these guys going up. And the projections are producing horizontal vestibular ocular reflex via, via the MLF, and it's going to go contralaterally, and we've seen all of this. Okay, so let's just go ahead and see what this looks like. So what we have is, again, here's our friend vestibular nuclear complex, and we have innervation coming into that, and it's going to go ahead and synapse and then send up via MLF. So here's MLF. Here's a better example because we have abducens and the vestibular nuclear complex in the same part. So here's our vestibular nuclear complex. We send our neuron out. It goes to the abducens where it synapses. Notice it's gone contralaterally. Then the abducens goes back contralaterally to the original side and ascends via MLF. All right, so this is the caudal pons. Right, we know because this is Darth Vader, and then you get to the caudal midbrain, and so here you have MLF, and it's going to go ahead and synapse on the trochlear nerve, and then that will send innervation out to the eye, and then here you have rostral midbrain. MLF is located here, and it's going to synapse on cranial nerve 3, the ocular motor, which is located right next to it. Okay, and so that brings us to the actual thing itself, the movement of the eye. If your head moves, then you're going to have the vestibular, like basically you're going to have sensation by the utricles. And so if your head moves this way, then you're going to have the right utricle will have a sort of counter direction of rotation, right? So as a result, you're going to have basically, it's easiest to look here. If your head moves this way, you want your eyes to move in the opposite direction, so you can maintain, looking at whatever it is you're looking, right? So if your eyes are moving, if your head's moving to the left, you want your eyes to move to the right so that you can stay looking at the thing you're looking at, right? And so this is a reflex to get your eyes to move this way. If your head moves that way, well, you want to innervate your lateral rectus, right? So stimulate that, inhibit your medial rectus. And then if you want your eyeball to move this way on the right side, stimulate your medial rectus, and then inhibit your lateral rectus. All right, so it's not too bad. And then same thing. What if your head is moving this way and your eye is moving this way? Well, you want your eyes to go opposite to your head. That's what the reflex is. So if you want your eyes to move to the right, then you want to stimulate your lateral rectus on the right side, inhibit your medial rectus on the right side, stimulate your medial rectus on the left side, inhibit your lateral rectus on the left side. All right, so it's not too bad. And then you have to think, okay, well, what's innervating the lateral rectus? Well, that's abducens. What's innervating the medial rectus? Well, that's the ocular motor nerve. All right, and so how do we get to the ocular motor nerve? Well, we start with the vestibular nuclear complex. We go up to the abducens. Abducens will do the lateral rectus. And then the abducens also stops by the medial rectus. All right, so not too bad. You can think 6 and then 3. All right, so that's about it. We had a couple of clinical correlations. The thalamus is our next destination. This is probably not going to be tested on, so I'm just going to go through it quickly. But basically, you can have from the superior vestibular nucleus, you can go up to the thalamus via median longitudinal fasciculus, and then synapse on the thalamus, specifically the ventral posterior medial nucleus. and then you can go up to the cerebral cortex, lateral postcentral gyrus, insular cortex, temporoparietal cortex. But you know, this is not going to be tested on, I believe. So basically, send up innervation and go to the thalamus, and then from the thalamus you can go to the cortex overall. Okay. Other places you can go to the reticular formation, and yeah, might also send information back to the vestibular nuclear complex, and then vestibular periphery. It's just cells lying between the abducens and VCN, two receptor cells in cristae and macula, which are in the ear itself. So again, cool, but not too much. And then here you just have vestibular nuclear complex, keep writing that wrong, and then ascending via median longitudinal fasciculus, which is located here and here and then here, and then we go to our friend the diencephalon. We remember the diencephalon, so it includes thalamus and hypothalamus, and then from the diencephalon you can go up to the cortex via the corona radiata. All right, so then clinical correlations. Vestibular system has to do with, you know, balance, unconscious proprioception, so dizziness, vertigo, nausea, vomiting, abnormal eye movements. We were told that the vertigo most commonly was paroxysmal positional vertigo, BPPV, and it's generally from head injury. But you could also have things such as vestibular neuritis, so some maybe inflammation of the vestibular neurons via some kind of viral infection. Meniere's disease is thought to be produced by an increase in fluid pressure in the inner ear and cause episodes of vertigo, as well as fluctuating hearing loss and ringing. And then this is the big one, nostalgia, involuntary rhythmic eye movements consisting of a slow movement in one direction followed by a rapid movement in the opposite direction. So involuntary eye movement, you have a slow direction, and then you have a fast direction, and the fast direction is called the nystagmus direction. Okay, so basically you can use this idea of nostalgia to determine if somebody has something wrong with the vestibular innervation. And so there's two clinical tests. The first is the rotation test, and so the idea is that you spin this person around like 20 times, and then you bring them to a stop. And so basically, when they're spinning, if they're spinning this way, your reflex is to move the opposite way. So you're going to have a slow response during your spin this way. And then when you come to a stop, you're going to have a rapid, right? You're inducing this in a normal person, a rapid fix to the other direction. And so that nystagmus, fast correction, should happen in the same direction as the spin when you're done spinning them, all right? Because you're going to compensate during spinning by moving your eyes opposite the direction of motion, because your head's spinning one direction, the reflex is to move your eyes in the opposite direction, and then when you come to a stop, you're going to have fast movement towards the direction of rotation, and that's what a healthy person should do. If they don't do that, then you know that something is wrong. All right, so excitation in the direction of rotation from the right utricle overall. Okay, so not too bad. Then we have basically, there's another test called the caloric or thermal test, and the idea is that you go ahead and you put, you tilt the guy backwards, and then you put some warm water or cold water into the ear canal. And so the idea is that you remember, like, hot rises, cold sinks, right? And so if you put temperature of water that's different from body temperature in this person's ear, it's going to cause a motion of the endolymph that's inside of the semicircular canals. And if it's moving, if the endolymph is moving inside the semicircular canals, then you're going to have basically inaction potential being generated in the vestibular system. Okay, and so the idea is that we have this mnemonic: cows, cold opposite, warm same. So if you put cold water in their ear, you're going to have nystagmus, the rapid movement, opposite to, let's see, the testing side. So if you have the warm ear, like you put it cold, so cows, cold opposite, warm same. So you put your cold water in here, and cold opposite, you get fast movement away, nystagmus away. You put warm water in, warm same, you get rapid eye movement towards the ear that you put the warm water in. Okay, that was super long, but that's it. Good job, guys. Again, don't get discouraged. You can do this, and we'll see you in the next one.